One of the most challenging parts of the healing experience is that most people who are coming from this place of ambition and like success is like, what do I do?
Yeah, I think I probably have asked you that on several occasions.
Yeah.
Even in my healing, what I thought was healing, it was an attempt to avoid feeling what my body needed to feel. And it was terrifying.
So your nervous system isn't wired for that. If you were in your body right now and you felt fully safe, this whole thing would seem super simple to you. What makes it so challenging is that we're not. In order to get to safety, which is what we're trying to do, we have to open up and receive all of it. All of the anger, all the sadness, all of the grief. When you do that, it fundamentally changes everything.
What is the most important thing for us to know when it comes to expanding our nervous system and our capacity to hold the next level of success?
The most important piece of information is really
Today, we're going to talk about something very important for those of us who are on a path of wanting to achieve success. I'm on that path, and I know if you're listening to this podcast, there is a version of success that you are also in pursuit of. But there's a big difference between the achievement of success and the felt experience of success. And we're going to break down the difference today and how to actually expand your nervous system's capacity to hold the next level that you might be really diligently working toward right now. I'm joined by someone who has been such a special part of my own healing journey, Wesley Kress, who is a practitioner. He's the founder of Breakthrough Performance and Rehab. He works with high performers, entrepreneurs, individuals navigating chronic pain, nervous system dysregulation, and this is part of why he's been a part of my journey, life transitions. And we dive into so much. I'm actually struggling for how to even prepare you for this conversation. And I think I'll just say this, that at a certain point of the achievement journey, the pursuit of success, a part of us starts to question, is this really what it's all about? And so if you've ever found yourself questioning that, if you find yourself maybe at the top of a mountain that you've climbed and you realize, gosh, it just doesn't feel like I thought it would. Or if you're at a different part in the journey, wondering why it just feels like there's so much struggle. This is a conversation that's going to have keys for you, clues for the next step in your own healing journey. It greatly impacted me in having the conversation, so I know it's going to impact you in hearing it. Wesley, welcome to Powerhouse Women.
Thank you, Lindsay. I really appreciate you having me on and creating the platform that you have. I think many people feel very called to the way in which you hold yourself. And I certainly felt that resonate when we first met, and I continue to feel that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that acknowledgement. And just, it's so beautiful to be in this journey. We were just speaking right before we officially started the podcast, before the podcast, just about the power of sharing our collective stories and experiences. And one of the things that I've loved to do is to be able to bring the people that have been really instrumental in mine. And you were recommended to me by a friend, and she's also been on the podcast, Dr. Laura DeCessaris. And she just said, you just have to trust me and go see Wes. And I don't really ask questions when she recommends something. And then I found that when I try to describe the work that you do, I really am a little bit at a loss for words. I'm sure you hear that reflected from your patients and clients often. How do you describe to someone exactly what it is that you do and the work that you are offering?
Yeah, I would say from a simplistic standpoint, I really help people transform emotional pain and physical pain, and also connect to their authentic self. And that really is what creates both of those things. Is we learn to compensate from a very young age, because most of society, including our parents, are taught to teach us based off of our behavior and based off of our achievements. So they don't connect to our inner world. And so they're not asking you what your experience is like. And so you don't really learn to connect to that part of you. And so over time, that creates a lot of incongruency or misalignment with your inner signals and your external life. And you learn to ignore that more and more. And depending on how far and how long and how deep and how wide that goes, you build up a lot of emotional pain. because you are disconnected to your truest expression, which is what authenticity is. It's the part of you that is always there. It's the essence of your expression. It's not complicated. What's complicated is trying to create the mask and wear the mask that we've learned that we have to keep running. And that is what makes things very challenging. And through that, energetically speaking, it creates all sorts of compensation through the nervous system. So a lot of our nervous system is based off of the conditioned self. Some cultures, spirituality call it the egoic structure, but this is sort of the foundational layer that creates the expression of epigenetics. And that is a large role in disease, sickness, and emotional and chronic pain. And so most people, when they think about health, they're thinking of things that are more basic, like exercise, nutrition, fitness, which are all part of it. But at the base layer, who is the one getting stressed, right? You hear the word stress causes disease, but like what's happening in that process? So this is really a deeper look into what stress actually is. And that really is this sort of misalignment that's going on. And our internal world is sort of the signal at which we come back to eventually. And I think you've been on this journey, and it's a big reason why you showed up in the clinic. And it's a sense of readiness, which we talked about. When people are ready, then they'll come see me. And that's really it. You know, if you're not, then that's okay. Like this isn't a right or wrong. This is about connection. And that's a lot of what I do is I help you connect back to yourself. And through that, we unwind the emotional pain and physical pain that's creating a lot of unnecessary human suffering.
And where I was specifically at in my own journey, I don't know that I would have had the words to say it this way, but now looking back to several months ago when I did find myself showing up for my first session, not necessarily understanding what we were going to do, but trusting it, was at this place where I had a lot of knowledge about my healing, and I had not reached a level of embodiment that I would have liked to. So we're going to distinguish in a bit. I really want to talk about that, but I want to start at this level because you see so many high achieving people and women in your clinic. And there's a big difference between achievement on the outside and the experience, like the lived experience of success, or we could say fulfillment. And I would love for you to distinguish between the two. I think that would be a really powerful place to anchor in this conversation.
Yeah, very well stated. You know, I think the nature of success is different than the experience of it. So the nervous system doesn't necessarily update because your external conditions changed. You know, if that was the case, then as people became more successful, they'd become happier, more content, and more peaceful. But what happens is the internal world, which is based on your nervous system, does not update based on your external outcomes. So in fact, usually a lot of the reason that hypermotivation can take place or high ambition is because you were longing for some sense of safety and connection. And then you learned that, okay, maybe your father or your mother were paying more attention when you were needed. And so you learned to be needed and you became competent. And then you recognize like, oh, they're not the only ones that actually respond to this. The entire social cultural construct actually does as well. And so you learn that like, well, I can handle that. And that is where this sort of aspect of success can drive people like Elon Musk, who is extraordinarily successful, but can be driven through urgency and the nature of lack of wholeness. And that can create a lot of things, but he doesn't get to experience that success without actually healing the things that drove it. And so none of this is necessarily good or bad. But it certainly changes the nature of outcome, and it changes capacity. So if you have so much energy running towards trying to not be discovered as the individual you were rejected as, which is your internal world, it now requires so much RAM to go towards that, right? So really, healing and performance are congruent. The highest order of performance is a regulated nervous system. And that regulation can't come from just cold plunges or sauna or breath work. It has to actually come from deeper transformation. And that's really what I do in the clinic is we sort of peel back the hood as to why the dysregulation is taking place to begin with and understand the roles that you may be playing that you don't recognize. It's almost like,
Mhm.
you know, I'm sure you've been in a relationship, and when you're in that relationship, some of your friends are like, hey, you know, there's this and that. And you're like, I don't know about that. But
Just
when
like
you,
holding goggles over your, like, I don't see it. What do you mean?
exactly. And our mind is wired in such a way to not see it if it causes pain from the attachment and bonding that we have with
Mhm.
the significant other, right? Same thing with our family. We don't see our family clearly or our parents clearly because our nervous system is wired for survival. It's
Mhm.
wired for predictability, and it is also wired for familiarity and social bonding. So those individuals, such as your parents, you have to see them in the perfect light so that you make sure that you have all the resources. So your
Mhm.
mind doesn't really interpret things accurately.
Mhm.
And same thing in these relationships is you're not necessarily interpreting things accurately, but then you step out of the relationship and you're like, that bonding and that attachment goes away. And you're like, oh, yeah, of course.
Mm.
I see it so clearly
Mhm.
now, but I
Mhm.
couldn't see it when I was in it. And so a lot of this, having walked the journey myself internally, and can see where other people are.
Yes.
And so that's the same thing with you and basically helping people along their journey. And so we are all at different junctures of the path, and they're not right or wrong or good or bad. They're really just a different vantage point within the whole. And they provide unique insights, and we can help each other as we navigate the internal world, which is different than the external, right? And as we do that, we can actually upgrade our capacity. So then not only can we enjoy the success we're actually creating, but we can also do so with a sense of ease and safety and enjoying the journey itself, not so much like contracting or straining to get somewhere that doesn't exist.
Yeah. And it's like that is the explanation of when we're saying like a very clickable podcast title, like expand your capacity to receive more.
Mhm.
That's essentially what we're talking about, expanding the nervous system's capacity.
Yeah, it's the ability to understand the difference between mindset and physiological response of the nervous system. So let's just say, like, you were like, you know what, I'm tired of not receiving. Like, I believe I'm worthy. And
Mhm.
so let's just say that you work hard enough and you receive something like a home or whatever. Your physiology's ability to actually experience that receptivity has everything to do with your nervous system and physiological state, not your not your mindset.
Yep.
So you can have all these beliefs, and I do see this a lot in the sort of area of self-development. It's just part of the equation. So mindset is a helpful piece along the way. So I don't want to discredit it. With that said, it's not going to change your physiological state.
Mm-hmm.
And so the physiological state in the nervous system, to be able to receive, you have to have the ability to slow down,
Mm.
and you have to have the ability to know that receptivity is safe. Right? So when you take your attention inward, are you scanning for threats externally?
Mm.
Right? Because if that's taking place, then we know that your nervous system is on guard
Yeah.
and in some state of fight or flight. And it has to be able to tolerate expansion and relaxation without bracing. You know, you can sort of say that, I'm sure, knowing a little bit about what you do big events.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Those events have a different type of energy,
Yes.
right? So that ability to hold that energy in the nervous system is different than just say a one-on-one conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So the ability for the nervous system to tolerate expansion and be able to relax without bracing is key.
Yeah. And in all the conversations we've had, I don't know that I've heard or I've clocked you saying it in that way. And that was such an unlock for me right there. The expansion while also remaining relaxed.
Yes.
And I'm like, let's come back to that in my sessions also. I would love to work on that leading up to the big event, because there is a nervous system response, even on a day like today, where let's just say I'm on, because I'm facilitating these conversations. I'm being present, and I'm also wanting to guide the conversation in a specific way. So I wear an aura ring, and I notice my body's response to big moments like this. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious if it can be in a more relaxed state, if my body can experience it as a more relaxed state, even though it's, let's say, a quote unquote big moment. Mm-hmm. So we'll just set that aside for later. That's more on a personal issue, but I want to actually come back to what you've been saying about the body and the physical symptoms that can start to alert us that the nervous system is perceiving what's going on differently than what may appear on the outside. And I'm actually wondering if this is the best place to have you share your personal journey into the body, into the emotions, into the pain, learning to transform it, because this is now the gift that you're giving to others. So how does it look, or how does the body communicate to us that something doesn't feel safe, even if it's something we think we want?
Totally. Yeah. And I think that's a big part of what we're all exploring through what I consider as the human experience.
Yes. This experiment, if we want to call it that.
It feels that way. You know, it's like...
We're like little lab rats.
Yeah. You know, I've heard so many different vantage points, and I think it just depends on where you're at. Right?
Yeah, true.
I mean, certainly in the depth of my pain and suffering, I thought it was one big sick joke. Now I see it as a cosmic joke in the way that certain spiritual teachers saw it.
Yes.
But it depends on where you're at, right? In terms of your internal experience of this. So I think they're all valid. And obviously, I think the more pain and suffering that we've experienced that we haven't been able to resolve, the more sensitive, reactive we can become in terms of like commentary. And we see that in the greater collective, you know, where people have had a greater level of contraction around different viewpoints, different ways of expressing. And that's just because they're holding a lot of emotional triggers that are unprocessed, that they're unconscious about. Right. And then the reason that we have a difficult time addressing those is because, for one, we have to have the self-awareness to look within. And that would require like full accountability to our internal experience. And then two, is a lot of those emotional triggers were shaped in our early upbringing. So because of what I was speaking to earlier about how our nervous system's wired for survivability, predictability, and familiarity and social bonding of the family unit, is that all these things we need to address, we don't address with our family. We look outside and we see all the problems with the world, and we become activists. We become individuals that are very much driven to fix these things in the world. And I certainly can relate to that in my own journey. But this is why, is because we avoid emotional pain, and particularly as we get closer to the self, including our family, is where most of those patterns are very, very different. That's why, having just passed the holidays, majority of people are going through material that's coming up from that place, right? And in my own journey of this, I sort of grew up in one of the world's most secretive religious cults called the 2x2s. There was a recent special on Hulu, and this was my journey into the mind and its impact on the physiology and our nervous system and psychology. So when you're born into a rigid system, and a cult is just the most rigid system you could get, it's the most contractionary, particularly this version, was that my nervous system started to learn that every person and thing and concept outside of it was evil. And, you know, all the people outside were essentially wrong. And I very much started to experience the world that way. And that was the beginning of my nervous system starting to change. And because the way the cult was set up, there was a lot of power dynamics. And there was also a lot of sexual abuse going on. From age 4 to 13, I experienced sexual abuse. And that very much changed my brain, my nervous system, in a very traumatic way, which is more traditional trauma that people might speak to. And just to clarify, that trauma is really just an overwhelming, intense experience that you're unable to process, right? And so part of that experience is made up of the sensations, which is how the body communicates. So the language of the body is really sensations, its emotions, its patterns, right? And those sensations, obviously an intense experience where your nervous system is not actually ready for such an event, is quite traumatizing. You know, it's kind of like being a woman. You could probably understand the nature that if in the first trimester, right, is more than likely you could lose a baby. The reason is because the development of the nervous system is, and the body is so limited that anything significant could be deadly, right? And so that is how we understand developmental trauma, is just like the degree of which someone's capacity is able to process the intensity of the experience. And so trauma is really that representation. And so I had some early genetic issues as well that went unaddressed. Partly, I would say, based on the nature of the cult, my family's belief structures and things like that, that further fed into physical symptoms and signs that started to manifest. But by the time I was 19, I had explored so many different paths from age 7 as I started to express certain symptoms and signs. And my looking back then, I was like, wow, so this seems so horrible. Like thinking like, am I the only one experiencing this, or is other people's experience like this as well? And as it got worse and worse, I recognized that we were having different experiences because no one else would probably be able to handle the nature of how intense this experience that was happening within me was occurring. And so there was a deep longing to understand what was happening. So I started understanding or studying Dr. Hawkins' books at 8 or 9 years old, trying to read and learn about different theology and religion, and trying to study medicine and trying to recognize like what was happening. And this was sort of like the early stages of like the internet. So I was like very much immersed into the mind of trying to learn my way out through the accumulation of knowledge instead of feel my way out. So this
can't relate at all, Wes. Cannot relate.
Yeah. And they say, your greatest strength is your greatest weakness. And I can certainly just realize that my mind's strength was what allowed me to continue to survive in the environment that I did. And by the time I was 19, it's when my body spoke louder than my mind. And so I had 70 different signs and symptoms. I had about 5 different autoimmune diseases, and I started to experience severe psychiatric symptoms, severe depression, agoraphobia, psychosis, the inability to create new memories. And then I was experienced the nature of being triggered by everything and everyone, both chemical sensitivity and then also through emotional triggers. And that was largely because of the contraction of the threat response. And it was quite a vicious cycle, right? You can imagine if you walk outside and you're having this sort of experience of being triggered, and then you think it's coming from outside of you, it feels like you just think everything is that way. And so how much of the past are you experiencing in the present kind of goes back to some of the early question as to the nature of the body and the sensations, and how do we interpret what's happening versus what's coming up from the past that's occurring in the present. And this is something that takes advanced understanding. And in the beginning, it's, you may not have enough self-awareness to understand it in the moment. So a lot of the techniques or exercises that I might give someone if they're really having a lot of different triggers, or even in your experience that you're talking about in terms of being on, the nature of being on is something that's very representative all the way through the journey. I would say that it evens out over time through both the development of coming back into the body, because that on is sort of like the energy is coming up into the mind and the body is sort of contracting in order to allow for that to occur.
Yeah.
And 20% of the physiology's energy goes to the brain, even though it's 2% of the weight. So it's the highest energy demand center. And so when we have these areas of contraction in the body, which is like bracing, and all of it is very energy intensive. So the more you can relax to the max, the more the energy can actually get into an even state to where the mind is actually not sort of sucking up the RAM, you could say, and that you can actually speak from a relaxed body. I always tell some of my patients, one of the reasons nicotine is one of the hardest drugs for people to give up is it tends to mimic more of the natural state. Is that it used to be called the writer's drug because it relaxes the body and it sharpens the mind.
Interesting.
And so most people long for that state, a relaxed body and a sharp mind. And so even though from a biochemistry standpoint, the addiction is pretty similar to caffeine, the longing for that state is way more addictive. And so people have a very difficult time giving it up because it is very deeply tracked with the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic nervous system. And so a lot of the nature of these factors sort of interplay with both healing and human development. And my experience through my trauma is sort of what led me into this aha moment that at 19, I had to surrender back into the body, and I was forced to, and I started to feel through that. And we can certainly talk more about what that led to, but that was the beginning of moving from the mind and back into the body.
Yeah. Which I actually just want to take a moment. I do want to hear as much as you're willing to share about that. Just to acknowledge, number one, the 9-year-old you, 7-year-old you that had the awareness to start to question and had this hunger to answer the question, is this just my experience? Like, just who you are as a soul is really, really special. It's very clear you are here in this lifetime with a really big mission and purpose. And there are so many different ways that journey could have led you. And then the 19-year-old to surrender to that depth of pain, to have that much happening in the body, I'm sure that there are other worlds where it could make you really question, do I just want to even continue on? What was it that actually had you choose to lean in versus so many other paths that could have taken you on?
Yeah, well, thank you for that acknowledgement. And I've been asked that question a few times. And to be honest with you, I didn't really have any other understanding of that there was a different way in terms of like at 9, questioning what was happening. I think curiosity is like the backbone to all forms of growth and expansion. And that was something that was always rooted in the nature of who I was. And it didn't mean just because it was pain, it was wrong. And I think I've learned that so much through my healing journey is that the conditioned self learns that pain is wrong. You sort of domesticate it through this process. But what you learn over time is that a lot of the emotional pain is the medicine as well, which is sort of paradoxical.
Yeah.
And so at 19, I would just say I was so contracted into the nature of the amount of trauma I was storing in the body and in how much accumulation in the mind. And I, for whatever reason, had a deep, profound insight that I was fighting what was happening inside. And that by
you just knew there was a part of you fighting, like resisting against it?
Yeah. I guess I could just sense, that, and it was just profound, clear, we use words to describe experiences. And so like, I've gone back and like expressed to people like it was a dark night of the soul. And I'm like, I look back and I'm like, we just use these words as a way of pointing to something that was real. At the end of the day, like it's only important until the pain is gone. So, I think at some points in my journey, it was like really necessary to be accurate, but really I realized it doesn't matter. What matters is really the pain itself. And I express that to a lot of people in the clinic, is that a lot of modern day psychology focuses on reframing, telling a better story, mindset. And look, it's all helpful, but it's like, if you had a cut on your arm and I went to touch it, you'd probably bat me away. But if it healed, you'd probably tell me the story, right? Like we don't have an issue with the story. We have an issue with the pain, right? And so as we heal our emotional pain and we become more deeply embodied and integrated, then the story is more flexible because we're only rigid with it because we think it has to be right so that we can get back to the painless state or the embodied state or the experience of expansion. And so at 19, I think the reason was simply for the fact that I had come to a deeper realization that in order to alchemize or transform, that the greatest level of expansion was complete relaxation. And my nervous system and body had not learned that, but it had tried everything but that. And so I had finally started to say like, okay, I'm just going to devote, which is really key to understand. Devotion is not with an outcome in mind. That for the rest of my life, I would explore what it was to heal, what it was to actually transform, and what was it like to actually understand these in such a way to help people navigate their own internal healing. And of course, it has fallen to the place that it is today. It's sort of evolved, you could say, as I navigated my own journey and my own healing, which was very exponential over the last 2.5 years, where it kind of culminated to a certain level of expression. And then it actually came all the way through, which was very interesting internally, because it went from me at 19 experiencing the world as what most traditions would consider as samsara or hell, like conceptually,
Yes.
theologically.
Yeah.
And it was an internal state of lived experience. It wasn't a belief. It was like a real felt experience, to, the last 2.5 years experiencing the opposite of what some traditions call nirvana, or the kingdom of heaven within, and where essentially my emotional triggers dissolved, my physical pain dissolved, and everything felt perfect. And then I realized that like the mind was grasping for perfection, when really perfection was just direct experience, to be present and to be here right now. And the way we do that is actually dissolving the false beliefs about ourselves that we accumulate through this process, which we were discussing earlier.
Yeah.
And through that, we're left with the only thing that's forever and eternal, which is love. So it's really a letting go, a shedding of all the things, more so than it is actually relearning. It's a remembering and a returning.
Yeah. And I think I'm smiling because I'm acknowledging how much that has become very present to me in this journey. The journey that I'm on actually shifted into, and you said it in a different way, but into, it was almost, again, I don't remember at a certain point that I started asking a different question, but just sort of like challenge my own motivation behind what I was trying to escape.
Yes.
And instead, and I think this was probably around the time that, no coincidence, I was led to booking a first session with you, and we started to deepen this understanding and bring it into the body of avoiding the emotional pain is actually the most painful process.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have you go a little bit deeper into that, because what I want to just invite people, if this is at this moment kind of meeting you in a place where you're like, something in this is resonating, but I actually don't even know what's in this for me. I don't have physical symptoms like he's talking about. I just want you to see if you can relax your mind and just allow this to resonate at whatever points it does. I think this is one of those conversations when, as people come back and re-listen at different points of the journey, including myself, I'm going to hear different things for myself. But one of the things that you've met me at this point of my journey of understanding that even in my healing, what I thought was healing, it was an attempt to avoid feeling what my body needed to feel. And it was terrifying to bring it into the body and feel that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's because the longer we go, right, the more intense it becomes. And that's why the wise saying is like, what is hard is easy and what is easy is hard. So it's like we go in the path of least resistance, meaning away from our emotional pain, because our nervous system is wired to move away from suffering and pain. And so it's intelligently designed to navigate. But at some point in the journey, we realize that like we're not getting closer to where we want, and we thought we were supposed to be going in the right direction.
Yeah.
And in some ways, externally, it looks like we are, because maybe we have like succeeded in some respect, but our experience isn't actually reflecting that inside. And that's where you start to ponder and recognize this. And resistance is really just a magnifier, right? And a lot of the healing path is really physics applied internally. So when you resist something, right, it magnifies it. So what I mean by resistance is like tension in the body. So it's like if you're in an argument with your significant other, right? And you were just able to embrace or accept that they were communicating from their vantage point, and their emotions had nothing to do with like you, which is really challenging to do for most people, because then it's like, oh, it's my identity, it's my character, you're threatening me.
Yeah.
So you could just receive, meaning not resist internally. In order to do that, you'd have to put your attention awareness inside of your body, which is part of the challenging part, is like to see where you are contracting or resisting that. And if you could receive it, then it would not actually magnify, and the likelihood of you actually engaging with it would be much less likely. Because what happens is these emotions arise and they go straight into some aspect of the role that we actually feel personal about, right? That's why like one of the 4 agreements in Don Miguel Ruiz is like to not take things personal, right? And his work was very foundational in my journey. But it's like, the reason it's challenging is because what's painful feels personal, right? If it didn't feel painful, then it wouldn't feel personal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we go about our daily lives, and if it doesn't feel painful, we don't really give it a second thought.
Yeah.
The moment it feels painful, it feels personal.
Oh, that's so true.
And so that creates some level of resistance, partly because we're wired for protection. And I always say, internally, you can't get to safety through protection. And this is one of the most deepest insights that I understood, is that like, oh, in order to get to safety, which is what we're trying to do, we have to open up and receive all of it. All of the anger, all the sadness, all of the grief, all of the emotional pain. And through that, our nervous system is able to metabolize that at a physiological and neurological level.
Mm-hmm.
And these things have been well understood from different models of thinking, like Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic, that emotions got digested in the same systems of the body as our food. That's why if you get emotional, it's like, oh, I don't want to eat. Or, women typically struggle with food issues, mainly because of this understanding of feeling like they have to earn safety, they have to earn rest, they have to earn worthiness. And what does food represent? Nourishment, right? And so like all of a sudden you start to create a relationship, which is the relationship your parents, you felt had towards you, which was a sense of control, right? So now you're using that same relationship towards your body and food in the same way they did, but with your perception that you're in control. So that's why
not realizing what we're doing at all.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to stay on this theme of receiving, and you referenced it here as well. It can show up in our worthiness wounds. You've talked a lot about, I think, just this paradox driven women, we could even just say driven people, but we're speaking to a lot of women face, where we may have this capacity to achieve, to build, but we also struggle to truly receive. It shows up, has shown up a lot for me in difficulty resting or softening. I was like trying to even understand logically what is softening, what is receiving.
Yes.
If we had met at another time. So I would love for you to unpack that.
Yeah. So softening, receiving, I always say like, go back to what that felt experience is like in the body. So again, it's like, for one, seeing where there's contraction and relaxing into that. Right.
Like physically in this moment, if we scan, I'm like adjusting myself in my chair to even bring presence back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that nature of softening has everything to do with opening and receiving in the body itself. This is why like the human experience is so vast. So our mind develops much further and faster than our body. And that's why the whole nature of self-realization is called that. It's called self-realization. It becomes real over time. And the whole sort of goal is embodiment. Embodiment just means that to be in your body, right? If you were in your body right now and you felt fully safe, this whole thing would seem super simple to you.
Yeah.
Right? What makes it so challenging is that we're not.
Yes.
And we don't, I mean, I guess we can kind of realize it, but you kind of can't, right? Like people think they're in their body and they're not. And sometimes like through the contrast, of course, if they go through a really stressful period or time, they're like, oh yeah, I was dissociated, but it's all relative, right? You only experience that relatively to your prior experience, a baseline. And this is why like Dr. Gabor Mate wrote like the myth of normal is like, it's like, I never experienced any sense of normalcy in my body. So I was trying to remember and get back to a place I'd never experienced.
Sure.
Right. And so it takes a lot of exploration. And that's really part of what you're speaking to. It's like, even in your journey through this, is like, what exactly is softening, right? What exactly is receiving? And it really is this nature of like being able to take your attention and awareness inward and explore what's happening in the body. And the body is really there giving you information. And the key is just to see it as information and not like, oh, now I'm contracted all the time. Now I'm like, I should relax. Like, it's not a should. The thing with this whole process is to actually meet it exactly where it's at. So one of the most challenging parts of the healing experience is that most people who are coming from this place of ambition and like success is like, what do I do?
Yeah, I think I probably have asked you that on several occasions.
Yeah. So, and you can sort of like take this to its furthest standpoint is that like most of the ambitious side is you are trying to do something to get somewhere. And the whole nature of this is to come back to being a human being, which is the most challenging aspect of this, right? It's to be without feeling like you had to do something to be, right? So when you rest and you relax, like what's coming up is probably some aspects of like, am I being productive? Am I actually like moving forward? And like, is that actually getting experience in your nervous system as like feeling guilty? Or is that like, oh, I'm not actually being productive? So with healing, it's why I say it's like a physics experiment. It's like, if you're familiar with just the basics of physics, it's like you bring an observer in the room and the experiment is identical, but by bringing the observer in the room, it changes the experiment. And a lot of that is internally, is that we're really just there to pay attention and to connect. And as we pay attention and as we connect with our internal world, it changes. But you can't do so, right, with like the need for it to change, right? Because then you're like bringing in a sense of rejection to what your felt experience is. And this is where it's like a nuance. It's because like from the mind, it's always like, how do we get there faster? And so like, I certainly experienced this tripping myself up on my way. And so that's why I speak to these points, is because like I was always trying to bypass certain things, and not purposefully, but like you come from a world of like productivity and enhancements and like hacks and all of those things. And it's like, actually, this whole process is to meet yourself exactly where you are. And no matter where you are is exactly where you need to be. And just trust that that inner unfoldment is exactly it. So it's really simple. It's just not easy. And a lot of the healing is that it's really, really simple, but it's not easy. Meaning that your ability to bring your attention and awareness into your body and your breath is how we process the past, because you can only process the past in the present. And if your attention and awareness is not in your body or breath, then you're probably in the dreaming mind. And you could be in your body and be thinking about the future. But, you know, if you've driven home and you're like, oh, how did I get home? You were in the dreaming mind. Everyone's had that experience, right?
Yeah.
So that is very much what people are during the day. Is they're not really thinking from their body. They're thinking away from their body or dissociated from, because their attention and awareness is outside of their body.
And I think that's the thing that's become so apparent, especially in the time that we've been working together, is how much time I was spending outside of myself. And I still, you can kind of see me wrestling with, I'm like, I understand it and I felt it. That's the biggest difference is I felt the difference now, but then I like sitting here, I'm like, and I couldn't tell you how I got there, how I, started to tune into that. But there's something you said that is a big topic that does show up in conversations with the women in this community. I think this would be a place we could insert just a really practical example of how this could look. And it comes down to rest. There's so many women that I speak to, and I would have been one of them, that I used to make this joke. I was like, where's the rest muscle? Like, and how do I work that one? Like I'm going to the gym for like leg day. I'm like, no, where's my rest muscle? Like, show me how to work that. Because that was very much my relationship to it. It's like, if it's not productive, I don't want it.
Totally.
So for someone listening, I'm like, all of you, all of us. And rest is something that's very triggering, does not feel safe. Essentially, that's what's happening. When we resist rest, we're saying that doesn't feel safe. Is that what I'm understanding? How could we start to play with rest as the mirror to this process that we're talking about?
Yeah. So almost all of us didn't experience rest as a signal for safety. And so this is why, like, when you talk to people about meditation, it almost never occurs, right? It's because, like, I was explaining this to someone recently. I said that the reason meditation is challenging is not that it's like complicated. Like, of course, you just sit there. It's that it's the perfect contrast to how much chaos is going on within your own self, right? So when you're sitting there, you like start to really pay attention to how much chaos is occurring within yourself. And if you're engaging with other things or you're kind of doing that, contrast of relativity is not as strong.
Yeah.
Right. So you realize, like, oh my goodness, like that intimacy of like, wow, this is like really strong. And the nature of the ability to allow rest to start to be experienced as safe is it needs to be done in a conscious way and gentle, right? So a lot of what I talk about in the clinic and with people really is around relationship. Relationship to self, relationship to others, relationship to the world, because healing is really about relationship more so than the content, because like if I start actually telling you all the content, you're intelligent enough that you can just take your old relationships back into this content. And I do see this online quite frequently where people have learned some of this content and now have like taken their old relationships and like using it with this new content, right? So now you're like, okay, I'm supposed to rest. And now I'm going to like force myself in a very rigid way to like rest, like it's like, yeah, I mean, you got the idea, right? But the relationship is really what we're working on, right? So it really comes down to being gentle and compassionate and kind, and particularly with ourselves, right? Those are things that are very challenging. The reason they're very challenging is, as I was mentioning before, the nervous system's wired for survivability, predictability, familiarity, and social bonding. You don't hear any self-love in that, right? So why people say, oh, self-love is so hard? It's because your nervous system isn't wired for that. And so that's why we abandon ourselves. That's why we start telling stories that people have told about us and believing them, is because we're wired to do that. Our nervous system and mind is wired more for negativity because of survival. So, someone tells you one negative thing, they told you 10 positive things. All you can do is fixate on that one. Yeah. It's because most of the positive things wouldn't kill you, right? So this is something that has to be like understood. And as you understand it, you can start to have a more loving relationship. So one of the greatest level of wisdom that I can convey to people is that, especially for high performing women, is like, tell me how you are with the relationship to the decisions that you make. Because most women, right, actually think that they're having a difficult time making decisions. And they really are not having a difficult time making decisions. What's happening is that their nervous system is fawning or freezing or fight or flight as they're coming into a decision because of how they've treated themselves in relationship to old decisions of the past. And so that internal model is based off of that. And so, of course, like if I was like very, very like sort of angry at you for whatever decision you made, you would be very much contracted as to making the wrong decision. But what you won't realize there is that to heal that isn't about you becoming the most intelligent person in the world and figuring out the right answer. It's about you actually healing the relationship to how you handle yourself, no matter what the outcome is. And that if you can do that, everything just becomes exploration. And so really practically speaking, I would just say to bring attention and awareness to the relationship of how you're navigating your business, how you're navigating your decision making. And let's just say like sales go down because you chose a strategic decision that was different than, last quarter. And like, how is your relationship there? Right. And in the short term, you might think like, hey, let me be like a cattle prong and be like, really harsh on myself, really disciplinary. And it works in the short term. But in the long term, you've created a relationship of bracing, contraction in the nervous system. Whereas if you were just kind and gentle and you redirected things, then your nervous system expands. And through that expansion, it's able to see a multiplicity of options. And through that openness, you can see things much more clear. And then you're actually making decisions not based off of pressure, but off of clarity. And that's the highest level of performance, is that when we are able to relax, when we're actually able to have this relationship with ourselves that's kind, that's gentle, that's loving, not harsh, no matter what the outcome is, then over time, we're naturally going to feel safer and we're going to be able to rest. And resting does require exposure. So we do need to just have the opportunity to actually create spaciousness in our life. So if you're very used to like scheduling things like back to back to back, it's just giving yourself more spaciousness, more windows of opportunity to just be. And know that that is a practice. And if it doesn't feel good, then you're unwinding the conditioning that was taught to you in that way. And that shows that it's effective. It's like when you're in meditation and you have the chaos of your mind going on, that means it's actually working. It's actually unwinding the conditioning in your body. The chaotic mind is just a representation of the unconnected body, the disconnected body, the part of your body you're not actually connected to. Because if you're connected to your body, your mind would be pretty much silent and clear. And I know that sounds crazy, but that's true.
And the more I have surrendered to this journey of tuning into the body, that is what I find.
Mm-hmm.
More clarity, more presence, and it hasn't actually translated to the external results I would look for before
Mm-hmm.
in terms of my business grew or this thing went better. But it's a felt sense that the way I'm operating is not only more sustainable, but will actually be, and I just say more successful in terms of, I don't even know what that looks like yet. Maybe
Correct.
I will be making less money, but I'll be happier, or it'll be a business that feels better. So even removing the way that I want to measure it has been a really big part of this. And I'm sort of like, maybe you could speak to this in your own undoing process. It's this interesting, as I disconnect from the self that I've built to survive, and I just really honor her.
Mm-hmm.
I say this with so much love. I now kind of laugh because I'm like, I don't know who I am. Like because I'm rediscovering, and I'm removing the layers that weren't actually who my true identity was, and getting to know then the new version underneath that layer.
Yeah.
And that can be, it's a little bit disorienting if I'm being honest, because then I actually bring that new level of self, and there's just all these layers that are continuing to unfold. I bring that back to my life and my relationships, and I'm like, oh, all of a sudden it doesn't fit the same in some of these places, which could be such a place of fear kicking in and wanting to retreat back into the things like, but then you almost try to put the other identity on, and you can't put the genie back in the bottle, essentially. So I'm in this weird, this analogy may or may not land for you, but as women, and maybe, your beautiful partner, you could ask her about this, is like when we're trying to grow out our bangs, it's just like, there's just this awkward in between where you're sort of like trying to figure out how to style them. And I feel like that's what's happening with my identity right now. Like, what is this identity? Yes. Who is she? What does this even look like? And how do I just keep showing up as the most current version and the most authentic version of me in that moment, and giving myself full permission that it's just going to continue to evolve. But it's this undoing. I feel like it's less of who I'm becoming, and it's the remembering.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was that process like for you, and how did it shape your relationships as you went through these different healing layers?
Yeah, very well articulated. And you are expressing and explaining the exact path of spirituality, not from beliefs or an ideology, but from a direct experience. So spirituality is really the de-identification of all things that you thought were you, and all identities that you thought were you, to return back to a state of just eternal presence, which is just the expression of what's coming through you, right? Not necessarily what the mind has thought it was and then curated for that moment. And so that's why it's destabilizing, is the mind is very much trying to navigate reality in a construct. And so as you sort of pierce and undo that model in the mind, it creates transition, which what you're speaking to, which is the most challenging part of the human experience. If you ask anyone, like, what's the most challenging part, it's always transition phases, right? Whether that's transition internally or externally. Those are what require the most energy to get through. And so it's natural. And sometimes just understanding that this is natural, that can give us a sense of trust, right? Because that is what we're returning back to, is trusting yourself, trusting life, trusting the unfolding. And so through this, as you are in the in-between phase, right, where the bangs are sort of in the middle of what you would feel.
Thank you for going with my analogy.
Yeah, from the standpoint of what you would visually see as like what you would like, right? Then that portion is where you really learn to actually expand love. Because love is not about comfort or actually feelings of pleasantness. It's about what's inhibiting it. So if you can sit with all of the emotional pain of the world, then you would be in love all the time, because nothing would be actually preventing you from keeping an open heart, right? So it's always the things that are preventing us from experiencing that are the challenge. You know, we oftentimes go for the comfort side because like we know that feeling, but really this is about holding all of the human experience, right? And so a lot of my own journey through this process was extraordinarily similar to what you're describing in terms of many transitions of identities that I thought I was, and then it would get crushed and shattered. And then I'm starting to try to hold on to something as if you were in a wide open ocean and you're grabbing onto a raft. You're like, no, this is me. Like, let me just grab onto this as I feel very open and vulnerable and exposed, right? And so that is very much a part of the process. And we grab onto something almost all the way through until we eventually settle on staying wide open and recognize that any holding on is just like actually what's creating the problems to begin with, right? Is like when you form an identity, that identity is a lived experience in the nervous system. And that has to be protected as if it's real. And so that's where this whole construction of a separate self comes philosophically, spiritually, is that you develop that to survive and you thought it was real.
Yeah.
But as it goes, it feels like a death. It feels like a real raw death in the body. And that's what's destabilizing. And that transition takes place. And then it kind of stabilizes and settles. And then you feel different. You feel expanded, meaning that it seems as if like more of you have returned. And all of this, the reason it's so challenging to describe or articulate is the same reason that if you had never tried chocolate and I said, let me try to describe chocolate for you, it would be almost impossible, right? Is we're trying to communicate something that's experiential, which is what the internal journey is. It's directly experiential. And this is why what's fascinating is most people have thought this is esoteric. And it's actually the opposite. It's like the paradox. It's like, it's the most real thing. It's the thing you're experiencing inside. And that's from direct phenomenology. So sensations, emotions, patterns, it couldn't be more real than that. But we use words to point to that. It doesn't make them real, but they help us because as we navigate that within ourselves, we can recognize, oh, other people are on the same journey within. And so for myself, it was the same process of this. And some of it was extraordinarily painful, beyond comprehension. It's unimaginable. And I think that is what actually leads to compassion, knowing that like there's this shared experience that everyone's going through. And just for anyone to be here going through this is like amazing. And I think that's what softens you, to speak to, well, how do we soften, or how do we do so by actually being present with the pain that we have inside and recognizing it in others. And as we do, we open up further and we're able to hold more of the human experience. And so a lot of healing really should be the opposite of what many people have learned what spirituality is. So a lot of times spirituality is taught from this standpoint of like, you get to this point where you escape the matrix, escape this, escape that. And that's actually, the matrix is just inside of you. And it's not outside of you. It feels outside of you, just like all these emotions and stuff. Sometimes like that person's triggering me, this and that. It's just touching on something inside. It's all inside of us. And the representation of healing is a deeper sense of shared intimacy and connection and safety with all human beings and all parts of the human expression, without this sense of like compartmentalization or disconnection. In order to do that, we have to actually deal with our own internal experience, right? And as we heal that and connect to it and we process through it and we expand to hold these things, then life becomes a lot more magical and easy. Right? And that's what we really long for. So to get back to your point of like, what is success? I think what we're longing for is the experience of success, not the actual success metrics that most businesses have longed to try to like, let me tell you how you can X number of sales over the next few months. And people like because the reason they really much pay attention is because you get this fleeting experience similar to like a drug. It's like, it feels apparently true until it's only like, why am I more contracted than before? And now I'm more stressed about metrics I don't control, instead of really focusing on the process itself. And so me going through this process of de-identification, which is really the spiritual process, was this continuous renewal of understanding that it is a devotion of a process. It's not an outcome. So it's like, if you start this process, in a year from now, 2 years from now, you're going to suffer less than you did prior. And that's all that matters.
And then going back to the RAM, like the computer analogy, that frees up so much more energy to be expressing the truest version of you that you've, shed to at that point. And I think that's the point that I'm at. I'm like, oh, wow, I'm actually doing a lot of the same work. There's very little that I think is going to shift in the work that I'm doing, but I'm more embodied in the intention behind it. Mm-hmm. And then watching these beautiful synchronicities piece together, some that may not actually come to fruition ever, maybe, or it'll be a little while if we're looking at linear time. But my experience inside of it is almost of awe and wonder to realize how beautifully connected it is the more I've focused on the internal journey.
Yes.
I just feel like there's 1,000 different directions I want to take this conversation, but to honor your time and just the generosity that you've already shared, and to kind of start to bring this together to a point that people can really grab a hold of, even if they're just sort of, this conversation may be opening a door for that they may be ready to walk through. They may just now acknowledge that the door is there. Something is speaking to them. There was this beautiful post, and I'm going to make sure to link your Instagram because it's one of my favorite accounts to follow, and you give such tangible advice to. It's the kind of information that I really encourage people to just sit with, to actually allow it to I send it to friends that were in these conversations of the difference between intellectualization and embodiment, because it gives me a different perspective on the experience I'm having. So I'll make sure to link all of that so people can connect with you. But I want to bring this back to this idea of, okay, if the internal experience and the nervous system is really the deciding factor between external success and experience of success. Okay, we were understanding the intention now is to expand the capacity to be with more and how we relate to that. What is the role, and I'm referencing your Instagram because there was this really brilliant carousel post that you had done about the interplay between emotion, sensation, let's bring it back to the body and how the body is actually the key. Mm-hmm. It's the thing that is always trying to lovingly guide us on this journey for whenever we're ready to accept that invitation.
Yeah, beautifully said. It's the sort of infinite intelligence of the universe running through us as us. Mm-hmm. And the language of the body, which is the post that you're speaking to, really is, emotion. It's the nature of patterns and sensations. And most of the time we are very focused on the nature of the mind and meaning and what does that matter? And so direct reality is really this practice of coming back to the direct sensations of the body. And so a lot of times, through healing work or spiritual work, people tend to focus on trying to control the mind. And I've always found this to be a very interesting statement, because I was like, if you could control the mind, this whole thing wouldn't matter, right? This is completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
So it's, again, the attempt to control the uncontrollable.
Yeah.
And really, so through that is a redirection of our attention awareness back into the body. And so if you're so focused on the sensations of your body and what's happening, then how much can be devoted towards the story you're making up in your mind, right? And so just through that, you're changing the direction of the RAM and how much space is going towards the practice of sensory input from the body. So when we talk about the nature of being grounded, what we're really speaking to, from an experiential standpoint, is taking your attention and awareness into the body and focusing on it at the exclusion of the mind. Right? Most people have the exclusion of the body and the inclusion of the mind. And the mind, when we speak about it, we're not speaking about it in separation to visceral experience, meaning that it's really best explained as a VR goggles and a somatic suit. And so it's why you're at a movie and you're like, wow, I'm just feeling this whole thing, what you're really feeling, right, is the mind going through that. You're not actually there. If you were to take your attention and awareness into this direct sensation, you'd feel the seat, you'd feel your groundedness on your feet. And so that would be a really good example of what the practice really is, right? It's this distinction of bringing presence, which is attention and awareness and an open heart, to the nature of your inner experience. And when you do that, it fundamentally changes everything. And so change is implicit in the redirection of our attention and awareness. And that's why, again, like this common question is like, I tried to figure this out forever. And in the beginning, I'm like, well, what do you actually do? And it's like, it's not about doing. It's about paying attention and being with it. And as you do, it changes. And that's the paradox of the universe, is that the greatest level of change actually isn't about doing anything active. It's about bringing presence, attention, awareness to your inner experience, which is sensations, emotions, and patterns. And as you do, your internal experience changes. And as a result, the world appears to change. That's why I say, like, all healing, the world didn't change, but your experience of it did. So your relationship to yourself, to others, to the world completely revolutionizes as you go through this process. And yet it's the same. And that's what you're speaking to about earlier, where you mentioned, like, I'm kind of doing a lot of the same things, but my experience is quite different. And that is the representation of healing. It's not like we are focused or fixated on trying to change the external outcomes so that you can have some moment of like excitement that like you think you're moving somewhere. What we're trying to do is change that. We're trying to bring your attention and awareness and process and digest the past, which is changing your experience of the present until all that's left is the present moment. And when you get there, you'll realize that there is no suffering in the present moment.
Damn. Like that's it right there, right?
Yes.
So if we were to tie this with a beautiful bow and also just give a great soundbite for social media, but the question would be, what is the most important thing for us to know when it comes to expanding our nervous system and our capacity to hold the next level of success?
Yeah, the most important piece of information is really to lead with curiosity and openness, and know that all aspects of the human experience are safe no matter what it is, no matter how extraordinarily difficult it can be to process, whether that's psychosis or some of the most deepest shadow parts of the human experience, is that all of it is okay. And if you fight it, it's sort of like playing a game of tag. You and I play a game of tag, and I say you're it, and you're playing the game. We're going to play that game.
Yep. And
the whole nature of this is actually to recognize the mind for what it is. It's a game of tag. And if you engage in it, you're going to go deeper into it. And if you can just acknowledge with it and see it for what it is, then you'll exit the game. And that is the nature of embodiment, is that you start to see the mind playing its games. And you've learned to play those games, so you may have a familiar somatic experience of it. And so that will lead you like, no, I know how to handle this. But really what you know how to handle is the familiar nature of experience within in relationship to whatever you're dealing with.
Yes.
And so that is the game of tag. So the mind is a game of tag. And the only way to exit it isn't to master the game like psychology. It's to actually exit the game and come back to the body.
So well said. You really are just such a gift. You've been such a gift to my life, to my journey. For those who want to connect with you deeper, whether it's just engage with your online presence, or if you're based in Scottsdale, Arizona, where I am based, if people are resonating with this conversation and just want to explore working deeper together, where's the best place for them to do that?
Thank you. And just wanted to acknowledge that you're so expressive in your gratitude and appreciation. And it's a felt resonance of expression to you as well. It's been so impactful meeting you and just getting to engage with your content. And there's such a shared understanding of that your leadership is based off of insight, right? And I do think that the evolution of where we're moving is from leadership based on authority to leadership based on insight. In order to get there, you have to humble yourself and go inside. And you've done that. And that's what people gravitate towards you. And so thank you for doing that. I can feel that in you. I can see that in you. And that's why people gravitate, is because your leadership is based on real insight, which is why it's called insight. You looked in and you saw the sight that was happening within, and you transformed your own inner pain into wisdom, and you're sharing it with so many. And so thank you. And to find me, Instagram is at Breakthrough Performance _Rehab. And then my website as well, www.breakthroughperformance-rehab.com. And yeah, I'm more than happy to connect with people that are on this path. Not everyone's ready. I wasn't ready for a long time in different ways. And this isn't about a better path. It's just a path of more truth and experience of wholeness, which is what we're all looking for.
And I think that you had prefaced that earlier about just the readiness and understanding that we will know when and if we are ready to engage, or with whom we're ready to engage. It's like the cliche, when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Yes.
Your intuition will lead you to the people who are meant to play a role in your journey. And I am profoundly grateful that my intuition / my friend Laura DeCessaris led me to your doorstep. I'm going to end with this question we love to have our guests answer, and it's really an opportunity to self-reflect and acknowledge the self, the true self, right, for the work that you've done. And we just really call it a powerhouse moment. So if I were to ask you, what is a recent powerhouse moment that you want to acknowledge yourself right here publicly with all of us for, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Yeah, the first thing is just supporting my beloved of 13 years through her transition over the last 3 years. She has some pretty significant medical issues, which she's brilliantly and eloquently navigated and supported her through that. And now she's kind of like starting her new position, and just watching her actually take a lot of the things that we're discussing now that she's learned both through many different people, not just me, and like watching her integrate that has been just profound. I think the people that we love and adore and cherish the most, oftentimes we are the least equipped to be able to help. And that's just because of the nature of the mind and the resistance to it. So the fact that she was so open to receiving this and willing to allow that to take place. And obviously, like, it's really just been her, but just that has been a deep sense of resonance that I have held enough softness and gentleness and fluidity, and not tried to come at it from a place of righteousness, but from a place of heart-centered understanding of having navigated that myself and trying to help her through that, and watching that, and just the brilliance of her expansion of these qualities within herself, and really trusting herself again, and realizing that that was always there, and that she just needed to remember and attune to it.
Oh, how beautiful. Like, truly, for both of you, I'm sure. And thank you so much for everything that you shared. Thank you for sharing your experience and ultimately your heart with us today. It's just been really a profound honor to have you here.
Well, likewise, thank you so much, Lindsay, and thank you for everything that you do. And you're leading so many women back into their heart, and that's the most successful thing we could ever do, is just live from our body, and that is through the heart. And you're doing that, and you're showing that, and thank you for that. And it's very beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much, truly.
Yeah.